Today, we're going to be outlining some of the implications for the financial sector and aligning itself with the Paris Agreement and some of the lessons that are emerging from financial institutions here in Southern Africa. We're going to look to unpack what the role of financial intermediaries are in responding to climate change and aligning their financial flows accordingly. So before I hand over to a colleague of mine to frame the first panel discussion, maybe just to explain how we've split it up. So we are going to have 2 rounds of discussions, the first round and then a second round. And we, here in the venue, physically, we're going to break for tea around 11 o'clock our time here in South Africa. And then we're going to reconvene shortly thereafter to start the second round of discussions. But it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the kind availability of the auditorium here, and that's made possible by Old Mutual, the colleagues at the International Development Research Center who have provided the resources for us to do this innovative knowledge brokering, which takes some of the practitioners' experiences and tries to codify that in formal academia and to knowledge broker in a way that speeds up our response to climate change. I'd also like to acknowledge the International Climate Initiative of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs, Climate Action, and their support of Aligning Financial Flows program that's co-hosting this event here today. And I think to the esteemed panelists, thank you so much for making the time available to be here for this very important discussion. I'm really glad that it's going to be documented online so that we can really put a flag in the ground for some of the discussions that are going to be happening in Sharm el-Sheikh later this year at COP 2017. And then finally, I'd be remiss of me not to acknowledge the bulk of the audience here. For those online who are joining, the audience in front of me have been with us for the last 2 days dealing with technical discussions around climate finance. They come from organizations who are pioneering in their field here in Southern Africa, and it would be an understatement to say that they're at the cutting edge of their craft. So I really do want to acknowledge their presence and the time and the valuable time that they've made out to be here for the past 2 days and the exciting day we've got lined up for us. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Samson to maybe just frame this first discussion, and then he will hand over to the moderator to hear from our esteemed panelists. Samson, over to you.
Thank you, Blaise. Good morning, everyone. My name is Samson Bewe. I'm from SouthSouthNorth, where I lead a project on aligning financial flows with the Paris Agreement in Africa. And the program is essentially supported by the International Climate Initiative of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Change. And most of our work, quite technically, filters into a lot of the ongoing discussions in the African group of negotiators. So my role today is essentially to frame the first panel discussion, which hinges on the following 3 things. Firstly, the necessity of a just transition in Africa. Secondly, what are some of the approaches or perhaps the opportunities and challenges that the Paris Agreement poses in terms of Africa actually actualizing its just energy transition? And finally, what actually constitutes a just, equitable, and perhaps fair transition? And so to effectively just kick off and contextualize the broader discussion, I mean, we're seeing across the world there are growing efforts, in certain cases incremental but significant, to decarbonize high-emitting sectors and economies in pursuit of a low-carbon pathway. And obviously, the science is very clear. There is a need to transition to net zero economies quite urgently. But the case for Africa to do so, and quite sustainably, is less clear. And why is that the case? Fossil fuels to date still make up around 40% of Africa's exports. And in addition to that, fossil fuels still contribute quite significantly to Africa's budget, financing key developmental objectives such as poverty, looking at redress and creating employment. And now, the challenge is that in this so-called transformation or transition to low climate pathways, there's a worry, a concern that an abrupt devaluation of asset classes that are tied to fossil fuels might constitute a systemic risk result in stranded assets, and in certain cases, or perhaps actually quite largely, stifle financial markets, and to a larger extent might even reverse the little gains or perhaps moderate or relative gains that Africa has made towards realizing its sustainable development goals. And now the question is, how does Africa leverage the opportunities and the challenges that the Paris Agreement poses in the context of actualizing its just transition? And of course, there's so many talking points in this regard, but our key focus here is climate finance. And to begin with, I think it's important to acknowledge that Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement is one of the 3 long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. And signatories to the Paris Agreement commit to making financial flows consistent with pathways to low emissions and climate resilient development. Now, what's important about aligning financial flows is that it's a key ingredient to realizing the other 2 long-term goals of the Paris Agreement, namely Article 2.1a, which focuses on the needs to mitigate rising global average temperatures, and Article 2.1b, which focuses on adapting to the impacts of climate change. Now, it's also important to recognize that when we think about Article 2.1c, we are actually talking about the broad spectrum of financial flows: public versus private, international versus domestic, green versus brown. And now, by making financial flows consistent, just transition pathways would benefit Africa by increasing its access to financial flows tied to the global climate shift. And in general, this creates an opportunity. But before that, I think it's important to recognize that to date, there is actually lack of proper guidance by the UNFCCC on how financial flows should and can be made consistent. And that in itself presents an opportunity for developing countries or countries across the world to actually develop their own paths to actually aligning their financial flows. And obviously, we've seen trends growing in ESG, sustainable finance, and obviously, I mean, there is potential or opportunities to aligning each of these financial instruments. But of course, when you look at it, from a broad perspective, measuring progress and tracking action is quite problematic. I think that's one of the most convoluted things about ESG. So many metrics based on so many different assumptions, which is quite problematic in the context of the Paris Agreement. And accordingly, the necessity to transition towards the 1.5 degree consistent climate scenario requires the need to delineate climate finance flows, across regions and countries to ensure that they are made consistent, with models of commerce and development. And of course, this implies that, the climate crisis will require the following 3 things: revamping the climate financing system with a view to accelerate the innovative and urgent solutions required to foster development in most countries. And secondly, the need to design a system that will marshal in investments, financing, market, and consumption choices for relevant stakeholders. And I think this is a very, very important point, because if you're going to look at the flow of finance, it's important to understand what motivates each particular financial flow. I mean, take a very basic example. Public finance flows normally seek to maximize welfare. And in certain cases, public finance flows seek to maximize profit. And of course, we've seen the growth of social impact investing, and obviously that's a very different case. But in providing the leveraging tools in order to align these financial flows, it's important to recognize what each of them seeks to maximize. And in moving forward to what actually necessitates or constitutes a just energy transition, I think it's important. I mean, the just transition in itself is a very, very broad concept. And I think in very simple terms, it could be broken down into the following 3 categories, which includes, first of all, social inclusion. And the question in this regard becomes, are financing systems put in place to empower? And the question becomes, is it an issue of empowerment versus participation? Secondly, the distribution of impacts. Does the system take into account sector-specific impacts of a transition, or does it acknowledge the transition's impact across various sectors? And third and finally, the intention. Does this system seek to reform, work within the norms and boundaries of the existing system, or does it seek to transform it entirely? And with these above-mentioned factors in mind, I will conclude my presentation now and hand over to the moderator. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lwandle. I'm from the Industrial Development Corporation. Very excited this morning, and I'll be meeting a lot of interesting panelists who would like to join me on the stage. Mr. Inkumbi, I don't know whether he's here. Yeah. Please join us. I think all of them are here. They will be taking us through what organizations and financial institutions are already doing in the region. They will be assisting us to actually go through this web of all of this information that banks are receiving from an international stage around climate change. They'll be telling us a little bit about the products that they are designing. They'll be telling us about policies and strategies that they are putting within their banks when it comes to the just transition. We've just been given an overview of what the just transition means around social inclusions, distribution, the impacts of that distribution, the boundaries that are created that one will need to actually assess when they're investing at that level. Without further ado, I would like Martin to just give us a little bit about the institution where he comes from as a start, so that we are familiar with the organization and the lay of the land that he's working within. And then I'll ask the same for all the participants to just give us an overview of who they are, the institutions where they come from, and after that, then we'll just get into the discussion at hand today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and good morning, or is it afternoon? No, it's still morning.
It's morning.
Morning. My name is Martin Inkumbi, and please feel free to call me Martin. I represent an organization called the Development Bank of Namibia. It's a DFI, relatively new in existence, only about 18 years. It's 100% public institutions owned by the government of the Republic of Namibia with a specific mandate, and the mandate is to support economic growth and social development in Namibia, having pretty much a local mandate. In other words, the bank will only lend to projects and enterprises that are operating within the borders of Namibia. It can have foreign ownership. Such a business can have foreign ownership. The focus is primarily industry, infrastructure, and also recently SMEs. So those are the three areas of focus. It is probably pretty much a combination here in South Africa between what the IDC and DBSA does, both industry and infrastructure. So that is the organization I'm representing.
Thank you for that introduction. Please go ahead.
Great, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Nicole Martens, and I am representing Old Mutual Investment Group. Old Mutual Investment Group is the investment arm of Old Mutual Limited, and specifically the listed equity arm. And within that organization, I am a senior stewardship professional. I head up the stewardship activities for our listed equity investments. And essentially what that means is that my role is in working with the companies in which we invest to help them along this transition to more sustainable and more inclusive economies.
Thanks, Nicole. John, please.
Thank you, and good morning. My name is John Mushayavanhu. Call me John. I represent an organization called FBC in Zimbabwe, which is a holding company for a bank, which we own 100%, a building society or mortgage company, which is involved in the construction of houses, and then we sell them to the market on mortgage. We also run an insurance company and a reinsurance company and a host of other businesses, but I think the companies that I'm going to be talking mostly about are the bank, the building society, the microfinance company, and the two insurance companies, which also have a role to play in climate action.
Interesting, and I think we wanted to find out the background about your institutions, because it will be crucial when we start tackling the issues which have been explained earlier on around what is the transition. How are you describing the transition within your institutions? And it would be great for us to hear a little bit how it's interpreted within the institutions? How is it differentiated, if at all differentiated, from the normal financial flows or the labeling around that? So if I may start with you, say, if you can just give us a little bit about your initial thoughts around how is your institution looking at issues around the transition? Are you thinking about them? And is there discussion already on what it means for this transition to be just? Or for you, it's still another financial flow which you are trying to, to grapple with? You are already living in an environment where, there's a high level of poverty, there's high levels, there's a lot of infrastructure investment that's still required. Issues around development are still at, I would assume, at a high level in your discussion. So I'll be keen to find out, is transition a new word for you? Is it a new area? Or is it something that you've been doing? It's just that you've not been calling that. If I can just hear your views around that.
Thank you very much. I think there is awareness of the terminology transition. It is a new terminology in our organization, but I think also in our country, specifically in the development finance space. The point you mentioned about the higher level of poverty and the challenges of underdevelopment probably take priority. There has been a focus on financing infrastructure, financing industrialization, projects that create employment opportunities. So I think it also comes with the thinking and acceptance that in many developing countries, Namibia included, carbon emissions are really low, and it's not a major concern at the moment. So what is probably of concern is financing climate adaptation. The impact of climate change on the livelihood of our citizens is of a serious concern. And that is where the financing flow should be focused on. Financing adaptation in agriculture, in specific infrastructure such as housing, energy saving, and so on.
Thank you so much. Just on that point, you are raising an issue that for a country like Namibia, the focus is more around how do you adapt to the changing climate. But what does it mean, because the country is still dependent on fossil fuels? What does it mean for your investments in that space from an infrastructure perspective? Are these issues being considered when a particular investment in that area is brought to your attention, is brought to you?
Yes, sustainability issues of social, environmental, and governance are being considered. There is definitely a comprehensive process of making those assessments, and up until the point of making an investment decision, those are being considered.
Thank you, Nicole, on that. And I think working for a South African organization where a just transition framework has been adopted, what would that mean for Old Mutual, having just heard about the criteria or considerations that are considered now in infrastructure projects that are still focused on fossil fuels, but they're now looking at them in a different way, where they're saying it is a fossil fuel industry, but how do we raise issues around sustainability? So I'll be keen to hear more about how Old Mutual is approaching these issues when it comes to transition, the transition itself. How are you labeling the transition, and what criteria are you bringing into those kind of investments that you're looking at?
Sure. So I think one thing, the starting point for me is always to remind people that Old Mutual is 178 years old, and we are a long-term investor. We're an institutional investor. Our investment horizon is similar to these development banks. It's 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So we're not in it for the short game, right? So when we think about transition, it's something that we've been through over more than a century, many transitions into many different kinds of markets and economies. Right now, the push is to transition to economies that are more sustainable, specifically lower carbon, and that are more inclusive, so that they're more resilient and more equal, right? That's the big pressure that's on at the moment. As part of that, we've signed up to the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, and Old Mutual as the group has signed up to the Asset Owner Initiative, where we've committed to ensure that our portfolios have a net zero carbon impact by 2050. The reason we've done that is not because of any kind of sort of fashion statement, but really because it's underpinned by what the science tells us. So the science tells us that in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we need to keep that global average to 1.5 degrees. And I know you've heard a lot about that over these last few days, I'm sure, right? And so that's particularly relevant for the African continent, so we're a Pan-African investor, because we know that sub-Saharan Africa in particular is likely to feel the effects at double the global average. So if our global average increase is 4 degrees, that means that in sub-Saharan Africa, so in countries like Namibia and South Africa, we're looking at 8 degrees. That fundamentally changes whether or not these countries are habitable in the first place. So for us, it's really about the science of saying this is something that is 100% necessary. But the key word in our approach is really about this transition, right? It's not something that happens overnight. It's a journey. So we as an investor have made this commitment, right, to get our portfolios to net zero. There's a couple of strategies you can employ to get to that goal. The first one, the simplest one, is to just divest. So the easiest way for us to say, oh, we've hit our target, is to just kick out any assets that don't meet the green criteria. But like you say, in emerging markets in general, in South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, that would leave you with very little to invest in, first off. So you'd be way off the benchmark. But also, when you look at companies like Sasol or Eskom, which are the biggest offenders in the Southern Hemisphere, those have a significant social impact as well. If everyone just pulled their money out of those companies, we'd have tens of thousands of people without jobs. We'd have serious impacts on the stability of energy supply, which is already strained. So for us as a responsible investor, to just leave those kinds of investments is equally irresponsible. So that's not really a viable decision for us. The second way that you can do it, right, to say achieve your net zero target is to offset. So this is a concept by which you say, I'm not going to change sort of my bad investments, but in addition, I'm going to invest in some sort of green or sort of negating projects, and in balance, I'll get to net zero. The trouble with an approach like that, first of all, is the pipeline of those green investments, but the second is that we haven't actually addressed the problem in the first place. So we're still heading towards this uninhabitable planet, which is not going to help anybody. That's why our focus when we talk about the transition is around stewardship. It's around being an active owner of our assets. So acknowledging that we have a long way to go, but that we've got a specific target of where we need to get to and a time in which we need to get there. And how do we work with the companies in which we invest to help them get there in a way that is ambitious but pragmatic, right? In a way that, I think it's naive to think that there'll be no losers in this transition to the new normal. There will be some industries, people, communities that will suffer more disproportionately. And our objective really is this transition, which is inevitable, which is happening, how do we ensure that it happens with minimal hurt? And so that's for us, when we talk about the just transition, that's really our focus. It's about stewarding these assets, stewarding the companies in which we invest toward this new normal in a way that minimizes hurt along the way.
Thanks, Nicole. Joan, you've heard about strategies, you've heard about the journey, you've heard about how the transition is being defined in these different organizations. For you who's working in a slightly different environment and who's got these products that you've created, I'll be keen to understand, how do you then take all of these new criteria, strategies and policies, how do you reflect them in the products, and what you're thinking about the integration, if you've not started, of these criteria and these policies and these strategies in the products that you eventually present to your clients?
Okay, thank you very much. For us, while transition may be a new word, it's something that has been happening over the years. And over the years, we have been developing products that are in line with the direction in which the whole world is moving. So, for example, in the area of mitigation, we have had quite a number of products that we have released onto the market as FBC. For starters, I did say that we have a building society which constructs houses, which we then on-sell to people. And you will be interested to know that the houses that we are constructing are designed in such a way that we are addressing some of these issues or mitigating them. For example, all the houses that we have constructed over the past 5 years, they've got solar geysers. And the houses that we are also constructing, we are making sure that they are powered by solar. In other words, it also improves the value of the house when it's got alternative power. And I think over and above that, we've also come up with some other innovative products. For example, we came up with an idea called ZimSwap, in short, which means Zimbabwe Schools Agriculture and Water Program, Water and Agriculture Program. Basically, what we do under this facility is that we finance schools, rural schools, to drill a borehole. And then we fence off 1 hectare of land around that school so that they can now irrigate and produce enough vegetables, food for that school and even for sale into the community. But beyond that, we make sure that that borehole is powered by solar. And that then also creates power that powers the classrooms. And now we are now empowering the community in the sense that adults who never went to school before can now attend evening classes because there's now electricity at the school. So that's one of the products that we have put in place. What we have also realized over the years is that transition also results in some disproportionate impact on some of the marginalized people. And so a few years back, we came up with a facility for retrenched workers to be able to start something new. So that if, for example, you were working for a tobacco farmer at a tobacco farm, and that farmer is no longer producing tobacco, you now want to start something new. So we've come up with a facility for retrenchees, and I'm pleased to say, ever since we put that in place, the rehabilitation of these people to start doing something new that is green has been phenomenal. And also the repayment rate has also been...
Of course, it wouldn't be.
It has also been quite good. Yeah. So those are some of the things that we are also doing. But also, in the area of transition, you will be aware that Zimbabwe is mostly a tobacco farming economy. Now, if you are going to transform a tobacco farmer into something else, you have to refinance some of the infrastructure that they've put in place.
Yes.
And so recently, we came up with a facility, a $30 million facility, where we are trying now to promote horticulture so that we can move these farmers from an area where they are having to cut down trees, cure tobacco and sell it, to an area where they are now growing a crop which is more environmental friendly. Yeah. So as we go with this idea of transition, we are always coming up with new products that also address that theme.
Yeah. This is very exciting because it's always assumed that, you know, the transition is something new. And for me, it's very exciting to hear that institutions, and not just any institutions in the region, financial institutions have been doing this for years. They've created products in place. They're hand-holding investee companies. They are coming up with strategies. They are coming up with policies. So the transition has been defined in the region. So on that note, I'll be keen to hear from you, Martin, about the emerging lessons that we can share with the world around this transition journey, or along this journey that we've termed transition, and how have we made it just along the way. So your emerging lessons from your institutions, which you would like to share with the other financial players and the community at large.
Yeah. Firstly, I would like to maybe just start by agreeing that yes, the transition has been happening a little bit longer than I think we realize, even in our economies, in countries like Namibia and the Development Bank, for example. Even in the case of renewable energy, DBN has been, in our country, the lead financier of IPP, especially solar IPP, having a portfolio of over $1 billion Namibian dollar. That is about 20% of the bank's investment portfolio. That's quite significant. But then again, as I said, if I'm looking at the structure of an economy like Namibia, emission has not been a significant problem. If you look at our energy sector, it's primarily hydro and now renewable energy in the form of wind and solar. Rarely coal, and then alternatively that energy is imported. The other sectors we will be looking at agriculture, tourism, industries, very low emission type of industry. So it's not, emission is not a significant problem for Namibia as a polluter. It is more the impact of world pollution on our economy, on the livelihood of our people. Obviously, it's very important that going forward, financial flows and investment should be directed in green energy, climate-friendly projects, and so on. That's very important. I think we are facing a problem of not reducing emission, but preventing the growth of emission in countries like us. That's number one. And then number two, very important, is how do we adapt to the consequences of climate change as a result of emissions, maybe from the more bigger industries in Asia, Europe, and obviously North America. And for us, it's very important that we are focusing on climate adaptation finance and also mitigation.
On that note, can you give us examples of these adaptation deals, I'll call them adaptation deals, that you are busy with within Namibia? If one were to classify each deal having an adaptation to climate change component in it, what would that mean for a deal maker?
Yeah, specifically at DBN, maybe not concrete examples of adaptation transaction or deals or projects we have financed, but those that we are planning to look at.
Components of them.
What especially in the agricultural sector, we are looking at financing agriculture under a controlled environment, with a recognition that depending on rain-fed agriculture in Namibia is no longer doing it. It's very risky. Rainfall patterns have become very risky, irregular, and falling. Temperatures are rising, and it becomes, the yields are falling. So it becomes more and more difficult really to keep up with the production levels in the changing climatic environment. So the alternative is basically then to go for agriculture under a controlled environment, your irrigation schemes, aquaculture, and the pipes. Those are the changes that we have to look at.
Thanks, Martin. Nicole, in terms of sectors, are there priority sectors that you are seeing emerging, playing a bigger role in this transition, or is it all the sectors? What is your experience from an Old Mutual perspective?
So I definitely think, well, the transition is one of those things to which no one is immune. So it's definitely going to affect every single industry and every single sector. So and an investor the size of Old Mutual is a sort of a universal investor, so we own a little bit of everything. But when it comes to sort of those key, I'd say, linchpin industries, so infrastructure is significant, and specifically around energy infrastructure. I know when we talk about the transition, it's typically energy focused, but it's going to be a lot more than that. And then obviously the big focus at the moment in terms of that justice component is around minerals and mining, because that's the sector that is predominantly supplying the current energy metrics. So when that is transitioned, what happens to that industry? So that's definitely something we're looking at. So energy and infrastructure are the really big ones. But I think there's a couple that are coming out that are really interesting as well around technology, specifically things like fintech as well, are really interesting to have a look at. And then even something, like agriculture is one, and things like retail for fast-moving consumer goods, like in food producers, because they're all directly impacted by these impacts that are being mentioned. And so it's really interesting to see some of the innovation that's coming from those industries as well.
On that note, on innovation, John, you spoke a little bit earlier on about the insurance, that you're also involved in the insurance space. I'll be keen to learn a little bit about the insurance products which form part of this transition. We've heard about the products, the focus on certain sectors, new sectors playing their own role within this transition. We all know how insurance is becoming such an important products, if I may call it that, within the financial services sector. Can you tell us a little bit about the insurance space? What is the role that is being played by the insurance space in the transition itself?
Yes, certainly. You will be aware that Southern Africa in particular is very prone to things like cyclones, things like droughts. And as the insurance sector, we've come up with insurance products that tend to mitigate some of those happenings. For example, we have weather-indexed insurance, which then ensures that in the event that a farmer plants and the crops don't germinate, at least they get something back. So that's one area where insurance has come into play to try and also address some of these things. Then there is also the issue of addressing those people who may be disproportionately affected by transition. I did mention earlier on situations where inevitably, for example, if a coal mine is closed, and these people have got just the skills to be miners, they don't have anywhere else to go. In insurance, we then come up with a retrenchment kind of insurance, where if someone then loses their job, at least they've got something to then go and start something completely new. So those are some of the products that we've come up with from an insurance perspective.
Thank you, and then I think what we're picking up is that in this transition journey that the region is going through, we've been able to set policies, strategies. We have identified sectors that will be very interesting for us. We've also been able to even further design products to actually respond to this. I'd like you to take our conversation a step further now around the whole notion around net zero, the relationship between this just transition and the net zero. And I'd like to hear your views around that. What does that mean? And I think, Nicole, you started earlier on touching on it. In the world of transitions, what does net zero mean for Old Mutual? And what does that mean in terms of the investments that you make and the conscious decisions that you are making in deciding which investment you're going to go into and not going into?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we take net zero very seriously. It's a stated target of ours is to achieve net zero across our portfolios by 2050. And we've taken the decision to achieve that through a focus on stewardship rather than through divestment or offsetting. And what that means is that, you know, when we talk about how we're going to make investments, there's two very specific processes that take place. The first one is around the asset allocation, right? So we're integrating aspects of environmental, social, and governance factors into the risk-adjusted return calculations for different investments. So it's part of how we make a decision around whether an investment is viable in the first place. And again, a reminder that we're doing that with a long-term horizon all the time. So we're trying to think, is this investment likely to be here in 20, 30 years' time? And if not, then does it make sense for us as a long-term investor? That's that first part. But the second part is really around saying, once we've decided to invest in a particular asset, how do we continue to identify, monitor, measure, and mitigate the most material ESG risks that we see and opportunities that might be present that maybe this asset isn't actually aware of just yet? So when we talk about companies that are in currently sort of high carbon industries, a lot of the time, even something like a mine has got the potential to transition to a completely different kind of business using the infrastructure that it's got. And so we're always thinking about it like that. So when we think about net zero and this just transition, we're thinking about what is the opportunity that exists for us here to steward a particular company towards a better outcome for us financially and in terms of sustainability, and to the social aspect, and that justice component we're always asking. Specifically, our focus right now is really around the employment criteria, and we're saying, what is the net job creation impact going to be of this transition? How many people are going to have to be retrained, redeployed, or retrenched, and what is your plan for that? We also realize that when we talk about getting to net zero, the path for South Africa specifically is going to be a bit different from sort of the global average, right? So when you look at some of the work that's come out of the IPCC, for example, they'll say it's a bit of a linear curve, right? They'll say you need to decrease your emissions by 7% a year every year, and then you'll get to net zero by 2050. In South Africa, it's more likely that it's going to be sort of a peak and plateau kind of graph. So we're probably going to go up a little bit, but then we'll come down. It's not going to be the same kind of trajectory. And so we realize that the comparisons we're using are probably not appropriate. So we're also building a local net zero benchmark that we can use, which is a more fair comparison for us, or a measure of progress over time. So we are, in all senses of the word, invested in this transition. And really focused on getting to net zero, again, because it's what the science tells us is necessary, and because we can see both sides of it, including the risk and the opportunity that it presents, especially in Africa, for us to leapfrog and to sort of become, as we see, sort of exporters of these technologies and things, and to really change. The transition is an opportunity for a lot of change in the dynamics.
Martin, your last words. We are our region is... it's got a lot of coal. We've got a lot of minerals. We still need to build infrastructure. Your last words around that in the context of the transition.
Yeah, firstly, maybe in the context of the Development Bank Namibia, the concept of transition and net zero is relatively new, and it's still to be elevated to the highest level of decision making. But it is also, or emissions is also an outcome that is not a significant risk in our economy at the moment. That's number two. And number three, I think already through environmental and social risk management and due diligence and assessment in the investment decision-making process, I think institutions like the Development Bank are already taking into account a plan towards the transition and net zero emission level. So you mentioned about resources that we have, coal, maybe in some countries like Namibia, South Africa, Botswana, maybe not so much Namibia. But I think that now presents an opportunity for netting of making investment in projects that are much more climate friendly for those investors that are already invested in polluting projects.
There's opportunities there. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Even within those high emitting sectors, there are opportunities to actually assist them transition further.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you. And in terms of infrastructure, are we still going to see a lot of infrastructure investments within those high emitting sectors? What is your organization's views around that?
I think there is a focus on green infrastructure, green energy, for example, at the moment. So I think, as Nicole mentioned, I think the importance is to leapfrog the developed world and not follow the same path. Now, when considering and making new investment, to look at more climate-friendly investment going forward, while we are already very close to net zero emission for some of the countries like Namibia, for example.
Thank you. And John, your last words before I go to you, Nicole, your last words say around this whole notion of net zero, this whole notion of just transition. You are working with clients, very small clients for that matter, within the housing space, with farmers. How is this interpreted at that level? Is it a matter of giving a better rate? Is it a matter of ensuring the right product is there when it's required? What is the long-term thinking around creating products that are going to be easily adopted by your clients and which are also going to help you to grow your business?
Okay, thank you. I think, first of all, let me start by saying what we see is the management of getting to net zero is like at FBC. Obviously, we have existing clients that we have financed who may already be in those areas that we want to transition from. Yeah. And we have to assist those to transition. And this is why earlier on I did mention some facilities that we are putting in place to make sure that we capacitate that transition. Then we have to look at it again from the point of view of new financing from now going forward. And I think this is where you are coming in, where you are saying what is it that we're going to do and how is it
long-term view.
How is it received in the long term. I think the general feeling is that that is the way we are going and that is the way it should be. And I did mention some of the innovations that we have put in place, and these are innovations that have been well received, well accepted by the communities in which we are operating. We have managed to transform people who were predominantly employees into entrepreneurs, venturing into very green businesses arising out of some of the facilities that we have put in place. So going forward, I think everyone is fully understanding that that is the way forward, and there's nothing we can do to go backwards. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nicole, last words from you. What can we expect from Old Mutual in the long term in this path of transitions? You already have a lot of your boxes ticked around net zero, around the transition, but in the long term, strategically, where do you see Old Mutual on this journey?
Yeah, thanks. I think the big next step for us is around the acknowledgement that the problems that we're facing, these challenges that we face, are systemic in nature, and they're of a scale that can't be addressed by one investor, right? Or even one central bank or one government. And so the next big step from our perspective is really around extending challenge into the market to our peers and to collaborate to say what are the issues that we can agree are important to all of us, where we can band together and really try and drive progress. We're very focused on real world impact going forward. So I think when you ask like what is the next step, what's coming from the future, it's really that increased emphasis on collaboration for real world impacts.
Thank you. And I think for me, it's been a very interesting hour. The hour has gone by very quickly. We've heard that the region is already involved with this journey of transition. They've gone as far as defining what we mean by a just transition. There's already products in place that are being implemented on the ground. There's already insurance products that are being on the ground, that are being provided for those clients who need them, and to actually assist them, position them in this transition. We've also heard that in terms of, assisting those high carbon intensive sectors, there's already infrastructure development views that we are putting in place to ensure that as we transition, we don't leave any of our sectors or any of our, anyone behind us. And on that note, I would like to thank you, all of you, and I'm not sure whether we'll still have a moment to ask questions from our panel, if there's any questions from the floor. There's no questions. Oh, there's one. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the insightful presentations. My comment is on aspects of just transition. I think if we look back at the African negotiators at COP26, one of the issues that they were raising is the same as what Martin indicated, that Namibia is not an emitter of greenhouse gases. It's a very small contributor, but it doesn't just stop at Namibia. It's the whole of Africa, and Africa is a polluter. It's a small portion, but the industrialized world is the biggest polluter. But when you look at the flow of climate finance, not a lot is coming into Africa, and we are being asked to stop producing our electricity from coal and move to green energy, with very little inflow coming in from the developed world, which is contributing the biggest to emission. What can we do to make that just?
Thank you. Is there another comment or question from the floor?
All right, I'll add another question. Thank you. This is to Nicole. So Nicole, when these decisions get made in the boardroom and the decision makers are faced with looking at the numbers, the return that this investment is going to give versus what are sometimes more qualitative impacts, the social and inclusivity and environmental impacts, how are those being weighed in the boardroom? Are there set sort of metrics and criteria that the bank has developed and using? Are you using something that's already in existence and that's kind of common internationally? Where's that going?
Please go ahead, Nicole.
Can I start with that one? I do have thoughts on your point as well, but let me just start with this one. Yeah. So that's a great question, and actually it really depends on which investor you speak to. So Old Mutual Investment Group is one of the longest running responsible investors on the continent. We have been working with ESG data for well over a decade now. We have in that time developed our expertise. We were the first African investor to have a dedicated responsible investment team. We have one of the largest ones on the continent. And that allows us to use an in-house data capability that not every investor has. But what we do is we pull on external data sources around sort of ESG metrics and scoring, and we put that into a bespoke tool that we have for addressing and assigning basically a metric, a quintile score to different companies based on their history around these specific material ESG risks. How have they been responding to those risks? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? And also a forward-looking angle, an aspect looking at, based on the current management that's in place, the leadership of that company, do we expect that they will be improving or worsening in terms of how they address those risks? And that is distilled into a metric which is weighted as part of our investment making decision. But we also have, as part of that, our responsible investment team is part of the investment team. It's not an add-on or an afterthought. So when the analysts or the portfolio managers are having discussions around particular industries or particular stocks, we're in that room and saying, look, here's the things you need to consider for this industry. From my team's perspective, we say, look, here's the stewardship angle we would take. If we were going to invest in this company, this is what our focus would be. So we have very deliberate ways of incorporating that data into the investment decision, and it's focused on trying to understand whether those material risks are improving or worsening the financial viability of that investment. So a qualitative aspect can be quantified for us. But different investors have got different ways of doing that. There isn't a standardized framework as yet. So most investment houses will use a bespoke scoring methodology for that. And it also allows for different investors to up or down weight particular issues based on what's a priority to them as a house as well, and the context in which they're investing.
Just on that note, Martin, do you want to come in here around the pricing of this risk? I know in the infrastructure space, industrialization space, you would want to price such risk because that's what determines whether the money that you're offering is cheap or not. Would you like to come in there?
In any pricing, obviously, the pricing depends on the weighted average cost of the funds of the institution. Where does it source its funding and at what price? And on top of that, there will be then a premium for the risk that the investment is carrying. And the higher the risk, obviously, the higher that premium, and it will result in an increased cost. And that can actually act as a disincentive for an investment in such a project by the project promoter. And I suppose indirectly that is one way of directing capital away from high emission or high risk projects to much more climate friendly projects. But I think there's also, maybe just to add to that, there is also simply the question of principles and values, and for an institution, for the lending institution, in determining which projects will it even consider, irrespective of what the return of that investment is. And if it's on the exclusion list, then it cannot be considered. That is one. But I think maybe moving on from that to the question the gentleman asked, then I do think that developing countries need to be incentivized or assisted to move to much more green projects. And that basically requires a very deliberate funding of of climate-friendly projects in the developing world by institutions such as the Green Climate Fund, for example. Countries need to be incentivized. You mentioned earlier that we have got a lot of resources, for example, coal, that instead of producing energy from coal, there need to be deliberate incentives for countries with coal resources, for example, to invest in renewable energy. Even if it's maybe more expensive, but that need to be compensated for less or for cheaper funding, for example. And that is how these countries could be incentivized to invest in much more green-friendly projects.
You're mentioning the Green Climate Fund. In the past few days, I think a lot of our conversations have been around the Green Climate Fund. Do you think at this point in time, the Green Climate Fund is taking into consideration issues faced by the region? The rich resources that we have, are they understanding in the criteria that they've put in place? That for us, it's not just about getting green, but it's about transitioning. It's about taking everyone with us in that transition. Do you have a few, do you have any comments on that? I'll start with you, Martin, still, and then I'll come to you, John, because I'm keen to hear your views also.
Well, from where I'm standing, I don't think there's an appreciation from the GCF of the status and experience in the journey that African countries or developing countries have traveled in the state where they are. There's probably a need for more consultation and understanding and appreciation on how do we move forward. The path could be different from the developed world towards the transition or towards the net zero emission. And therefore, I think there is a need for a better understanding of such funds such as the GCF. How do we bring the African economy on board on terms that are easier for them, if I can put it that way.
Okay. Do you have any views around that, John?
Well, yeah, in my view, the disconnect, I think, arises out of the fact that us, as the people who are applying for the funding, are not very clear as to the requirements of GCF. And so you have to go through a long process where you submit something thinking that it's right and you've covered everything, they come back to you. And by the time you are done with it, it's 2 years down the line. So what I think is required is a situation where they tell us exactly what it is they want to the dot. So that when eventually we submit, we are submitting what is right. That's number one. Then number two, most of the projects that one would want to fund also require a large amount of work before the project itself is submitted in the form of pre-feasibility studies. Again, that is something that requires funding, but there's no one who is providing funding at that level because people just want to look at what is the project and how we're going to fund it going forward. So I think those are some of the issues that we need to address where there is dialogue between the funders and us who are being funded so that we are speaking the same language.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial, Nicole. What can we teach the GCF around the transition journey that Southern Africa is going through, or even the continent in that matter?
Yeah. I think, so the first lesson we need to learn is that to refer to Africa as one homogeneous region is incorrect. And I know, from the point around Africa is a small emitter, South Africa is the 13th largest emitter in the world. We have the single largest emitting single source in the world in Secunda. So mea culpa, right? We've absolutely contributed to the problem. But I think that's one thing I would definitely say. And I'd say that it's about the application of international best practice principle in an appropriately nuanced way. And again, stemming from sort of what we do and what I do for a living, you cannot design this thing without having a conversation with people that are going to use it. And I think that's one of the classic mistakes that's maybe been made there. But on the comment around sort of how do we get the finance flowing through these vehicles, I would say first thing to note is that there's nothing fair about the climate emergency. It's just not fair. And sitting around and complaining about how unfair it is completely understandable, but not going to help us. And hoping that it will become fair is also not going to work. I would say my sort of suggestion to the people in the room and the organizations that you represent, and what we saw at COP last year, is that the squeaky wheel gets oil, right? So if you go and you're loud and you say, we need money, you come back with an $8.5 billion commitment from COP, right? That's what South Africa did. So you need to really just go out there and say, we understand that this transition is happening. We didn't cause it. That's a whole nother thing, but it has to happen because we're going to feel it. And so this is what we need. And not just we like this, but we deserve this, we demand this. The organizations that signed up to the Paris Agreement committed, these countries committed to providing that finance, and we have not seen it. And so I don't want to start a whole thing, but I just say that part of them signing that paper and jumping up and down and taking all the photos was that they said that they would assist developing nations with this. And I would say we're hosting this year, so let's start a movement in this room. We're hosting on the continent this year. We cannot let them leave until they have delivered on what they have promised. And the ones that make the most noise are the ones that are going to get that finance.
On that note, I've got nothing to add. We're going to take a 10-minute break for coffee and tea, and then we're going to start with our second panel.
So I'm not going to take much time. I'm just going to thank our previous panelists. We've got another upcoming panel coming, but I thought in order to frame that particular discussion, part of what the Southern African Climate Finance Partnership does is try and bring academia and practitioners closer together, and part of that is codifying some of this knowledge in academia. Is very important, and we recognize this, but the urgency of climate change requires us to do so at a speed which I don't know if the academic world has seen in recent years. So we need to make sure that that world of academia and practice is made smaller. So I want to invite one of my colleagues. He's a master's student that the SACFP has been funding, who's been doing some important research to understand what some of the communities on the ground who are recipients of so-called climate finance or climate finance are experiencing. So Sonobile, please come and share some of your thoughts, and then we'll hand over to the moderator for the next panel. Sonobile.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Okay. Please, I'm going to be sharing the pictures. Okay, so my research aims to investigate the socio-economic impacts of climate finance investment in renewable energy in the Northern Cape province. The case study area that I've selected is Siatemba local municipality, which is located in the Northern Cape. Currently, the municipality has about 5 renewable energy projects. These include 2 wind farms, and then there are 3 solar plants in the municipality. The study is supervised by Professor Nolene Murray from the University of Pretoria, and the pictures that will be shown here were taken by Professor Fair from the University of Cape Town. So just to give a big background of the municipality that I'm working in. Siatemba local municipality, similar to some of South Africa's small and rural municipality, has challenges of high unemployment, and then there's poverty, high levels of poverty, and then also there are low levels of education within the community, and there are also lack of skills among the community members. Also, due to these challenges that I've just highlighted, most of the population depends on social grants for livelihoods. For instance, according to Statistics South Africa, about 49% of the population in Siatemba are dependent on social grants for livelihood. Also, despite the development of renewable energy plants in the municipality, energy poverty still remains a consistent challenge that is facing the population of that municipality. Because due to high prices of electricity and these constant power cuts that we experience as South Africa. Also, the development of renewable energy in that municipality is changing the landscape of the municipality, because most of the farmers are are renting out their land to renewable energy plants, and then people that were working working in those farms have to relocate to other places seeking employment. So in South Africa, the Just Transition promises to, in South Africa, there is a legal requirement for the renewable energy power producers to contribute to socio-economic development in local communities where their operations are located. So that in terms of job creation and promoting local content and promoting local ownership through establishing community trusts within the communities. So this promise of socioeconomic benefits create high expectation amongst the local population, especially in communities such as Siatemba local municipality, where there's minimal development that is taking place in the area. And in some cases, most of the independent power producers are failing to manage those expectations among the communities. So the results from the field from the field indicate that since the first energy project was implemented in Siatemba local municipality, significant climate finance investment have been invested in the municipality. For instance, according to the IPP office, about 10 billion rands has been invested in Siatemba local municipality since 2011 until now. And of that amount, about 2 billion has gone to socio-economic development projects within the community. So various economic development projects have been supported by renewable energy companies. These include like providing bursaries to local students, and then donating of food and other necessities to the community centers and old age homes, and installing Wi-Fi to local schools and libraries. And skills development programs have been undertaken by the municipalities. Also, jobs have been created, especially during the construction phase of the renewable energy plants. However, despite all these socio-economic benefits, significant challenges still exist within the municipality. And also, most of the projects that are supported by the renewable energy plants seem to be welfare projects and social purpose projects. There are no long-term. There are few, if there are, long-term sustainable projects that can develop the economy of the municipality. So a takeaway from this research will be: what can the financial institutions play to assist renewable energy companies achieve the promise of a just transition at the local municipality level, especially for communities such as Siatemba local municipality, where there's minimal development that is happening in the area? Okay, thank you. So I think
Thank you, Sonobile. So Sonobile is one of 3 master's students, and we've got another PhD student on the program that we're currently funding to do similar, but very different research. So a wide variety there. But I'm going to, while I just hand back, ask the panelists for the next round of discussions to take their seats, so I can hand over to our moderator, Lwandle, to take us through the second half of our discussion. And over to you, Lwandle.
Thank you. Am I audible, Fred? Yeah. Good morning again. We're back for the second part of our discussion this morning. Thank you very much for that example that has been given to us. Earlier on, we were very much focused on the strategic policies, emerging products from the markets. We touched a little bit on politics of financial services when it comes to climate change and climate flows. I think the presentation earlier on is a precursor to the discussion that we're going to have. Basically, the presentation that we've just seen, we looked at what is really happening on the ground when it comes to the projects that we were discussing earlier on. And I'm hoping with this panel, we'll be able to tackle some of the emerging lessons on the ground. We're going to hear a little bit more about what are different institutions doing within the region, or how are they navigating through the space of just transition. And I'm not sure what to call it or label it. And I'd leave it to you to label it for yourselves, because I'm sure within each institution, you find a way of labeling these issues yourselves. But before I take you into this conversation, I'd like you to present yourselves, give us a little bit of overview of your institution, so that when we get into the discussion, we sort of understand the context within which you are operating. So I'll start with you, sir. If you can just give us an overview of your institution, and then we'll get into the discussion of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lwandle. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Great. My name is Jerry Mwendapole from the National Development Bank. We call it NDB in Botswana. Botswana is a semi-arid country, landlocked in southern Africa. I think all of you that are here, we are neighbors somehow. We like to think of Botswana as not a landlocked, but interlinked country. NDB in this space is concerned with SME development, and we participate in all sectors of the economy, investing in these sectors. But over the years, we've shifted quite a lot towards agriculture. And so most of our assets actually lie in the agricultural space. So I think for my discussion today, I'll dwell a lot in terms of climate change and agriculture, agricultural financing that is necessary for the world today, especially for Botswana, and what we are doing in that space. Thank you.
And especially for food security.
Yes,
I think
for
the
food
region,
security in the region
and we'd like
and the
to hear a
country
little
level.
bit more about that. To you, ma'am.
Okay, my name is Claire Hobbs. I work at Bank Windhoek in Namibia. We are a member of the Capricorn Group. Capricorn Group has another bank in Botswana, Banka Boroni. We have an asset management arm, we have a micro-lending arm, we have associates in the bank assurance industry, and even a data and Paratus is data and fiber within Namibia. We are the second largest bank, depending on how you measure us, in Namibia, but we are the only locally owned bank in Namibia, fully locally owned bank, and that is what we pride ourselves on, and that is what makes us a little bit more unique in terms of we are invested in Namibia for Namibia, and we want to partner with the Namibian government to ensure that we are able to achieve all the goals that they have, and not only those goals that we have.
Thanks, Claire. Sir?
Thank you very much, and good morning. Still morning, I guess.
Yes, it's still morning. Yes.
My name is Chali Mwefyeni. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Zanaco. Zanaco is a commercial bank in Zambia. It is a universal bank looking after the consumer banking space, corporate banking space, public sector, SME, and agriculture. It is it's listed on the stock exchange, owned by Arise, which is made up of FMO, Norfund, and Rabobank. They cater for about 46% shares. And then 25% shares is owned by the Industrial Development Corporation Company, who holds 25% shares on behalf of the Republic of Zambia. 10% of the shareholding is with a National Pensions Fund, and then 19% of the shares are free-floating on the Lusaka Stock Exchange. Something unique about Zanaco, first and foremost, it's a local bank and the largest bank from a footprint perspective in terms of brick and mortar and agency banking. But also what you find is that it's the biggest in terms of customer base as well. It's largest in terms of balance sheet. Another unique differentiator of Zanaco is that it's 53 years old, but it's the way in which it was developed. So post-independence, the government then decided to form a bank that should meet the needs of local entrepreneurs and consumer customers that were left out in the financial services industry. Obviously, at the time, there were a lot of international banks, but they were not spread into rural areas. So that was the genesis of Zanaco, and the DNA follows really the lower of the pyramid segments to ensure that as we make profits, we are also impacting communities and societies in which we're operating.
Thank you. And for those online who've just joined us, my name is Lwandle. I'm from the Industrial Development Corporation, which is situated in Johannesburg. We operate across Sub-Sahara region. We're an industrial development bank, basically a development finance institution. On that note, you've heard from our panelists where they come from, and I think that will shape our conversation as for the second part of our engagement. And I would like to start with you, Jerry. You touched a little bit on it. Earlier on, we were discussing issues of the just transition. We were discussing issues from a policy and a strategic perspective, what net zero means. I'll be keen to find out from you, from a practical perspective, when you are basically servicing your clients, what is it that you introduce at that level, at client level, to ensure that the goals or policies, I'm not sure what you've put in place, you'll tell us a little bit about that, but what is it that you're communicating to your clients to ensure that they're aligned to your policies and strategies that you've set for yourselves as an institution? And if you can give us a practical overview of that journey that you take your clients through.
Thank you, Lwandle. Perhaps let's start with putting context to it all. NDB is a state-owned enterprise. So in terms from, if we look at it from a policy perspective, we have an opportunity to interact with government quite closely because they're actually our shareholder. So we then influence policy from a government perspective in terms of what must happen in the agricultural space. Issues around climate change, we're in close conversation with government. When government goes out and signs agreements around countries around the world in terms of what we must be doing about just transitions and net zero, we are, if you like, at the pragmatic institution to implement those initiatives. And from an NDB perspective, especially in the agri space, where as a country, we are a net importer of food. Yep. So food security for Botswana is a big issue. Like I mentioned earlier on, we're a semi-arid country. And every year it's getting hotter and hotter. And every year the rain patterns are changing. So to have that food security aspect being dealt with requires a new approach. And that approach from our perspective is smart farming. So when we sit with clients, we begin to talk to them around issues around smart farming and how they can mitigate against changing weather patterns. Traditionally, our farmers farm using rain. So it's an annual event. At the end of the year, everybody cultivate their fields and look up to the skies for rain to fall. But that in its own is not enough for food security in terms of your arable grain produce that comes out. There's pastoral farming that also relies on the rains for pasture to grow. Mm-hmm. So there's a shift that has been happening over years. So these terms are coming through around just transitions. Botswana as a country has been looking at how to survive in a semi-arid environment. Mm. So for us, when someone wants to invest in agriculture, the first thing is, well, what are you going to do about the weather? Can you control the heat on your farm? So we then begin to have conversations around the techniques that are available in the market. For instance, are you going to be farming in a greenhouse? From an investment perspective, if someone is farming in a controlled environment, it means our money is protected. Simple. If you tell me you're going to plow an open field and you're relying on rain, what if it doesn't rain? Our investment goes unpaid, and then also it's lost in the process. So the conversations at the table are around smart farming techniques, yep. Greenhouses. The heat going up means net shedding for everything that you produce. Being a semi-arid country, water is a scarce commodity. So we use a lot of underground water, but how are you extracting that water? Is it through renewable energy? And then for those type of techniques, we provide incentives. We then look at, say, listen, can we give it to you at a lower rate because there's a risk mitigant to that.
Yeah.
But in effect, what we've been doing over these years is we've been adapting to climate change.
Yeah.
So when these conversations start, we've been in the game for quite a while and surviving on that. So what we actually then needs to see happening is now funding streams coming through to enhance these products and services that we're already offering. From a government perspective, there are programs with part grant that we're managing on behalf of government.
Okay.
That if you come to me and say you're going into a greenhouse, 50% grant from government, and then we fund 50%. So these are practical, pragmatic solutions that are happening between NDB and the government of Botswana in relation to climate change.
You're already touching around issues of risk, pricing, issues around how you structure your deals, your blended finance or concessional loans that you have, and I'm not sure, and I'll come back to you around that, and I'd leave you with that thought because I'd like you to touch on that. And then I'd move to you, Namibia side of things. A very dry place. So I'll be keen also to pose a similar question to you. How are you taking your clients through this net zero journey, this just transition journey? Other people think it's the same thing. Earlier on, we found out that whilst it may look similar, it's actually different on the ground. The justice in this whole transition is at the core of what we're doing. However, my question to you is, how do you take your clients through this? Sometimes for them, it's not a priority. For them, it's about survival and, you know, being able to access funds. So your views around that from a Namibian perspective.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think Capricorn Group prides itself, and specifically Bank Windhoek, on we are relationship banking. So we know our clients. We make sure we understand our clients, whether it is a big corporate or whether it's a small, medium enterprise or an individual. And I think in the agricultural space, we've been very active. Bank Windhoek is 40 years old this year. And I think we've done a lot in the various areas. So we represented across Namibia. So you're going to have the more arid areas where, you know, farming is not viable. Or you're going to have the communal farmers in the north. Or you might have an area along the coast where all of a sudden people are putting up greenhouses. So there's a lot of opportunities. I'm sure you've seen that Namibia is now exporting berries, doing very, very well with that. It wasn't something that people thought of before. Dates, avocados. How do we ensure that we make ourselves self-sufficient? But again, as my colleague has said, it's a matter of ensuring that the client understands what it is that they are investing in and what are you going to lend to them for. We also would not lend to somebody who's just going to plow a field and say, I'm going to plant maize. We need to understand the risk behind that transaction. After all, we are a bank. We are also listed on the Namibian Stock Exchange. We're taking other people's money and lending it out. So as much as we need to help our borrowers, we need to be responsible lenders and we need to keep our depositors' money safe. So I think Bank Windhoek and even Bank Gaborone, we pride ourselves on understanding and listening to our clients, being there for them and then explaining to them what is changing, how it's changing, you know, are there new farming methods that are out there? Do we need to partner with other farm implements or guys who provide netting, shade netting? How do we need to assist them? And I think recently when we issued our sustainability bond, we had a big campaign out in a sustainability loan. And we tried to offer favorable terms. But again, that the transaction must be bankable. There must be a return in it for us. And educating, not just financial literacy, but ensuring that we have agricultural shows. We have lots of panel discussions. In the last 3 years, with everybody using Teams and being online, was a great opportunity to hold those types of discussions. Even today, we've got the physical presence and then you've got the virtual presence. And I think that already allowed more people access to these type of discussions. You didn't have to register and pay for it. You could just watch it on YouTube. Those are the types of things that we're trying to do to ensure that we put these panel discussions together. And it's not just about financial literacy, but what is it that our clients want to know about? And how do we put a program together or a discussion together and pull in the experts and let them listen, let them ask their questions and learn from others in the area or even in Botswana or Zambia? What are they doing? What is South Africa doing? And how can we capitalize on that? Can we also do something? And how do we partner with each other? I think that's the important thing. Previous speaker spoke about collaboration. I think that's critical. I think in Southern Africa, not just the banks must work together, but I think, whatever sector you're in, see what other guys are doing in the region and how can we learn from them and what can we teach others as well. That's for us very important.
I'm picking up on relationships. There's a training element. There's a capacity building element. There's outreach to your customers. Coming to Zambia, your engagement with your clients, you've heard what is happening in Botswana, what's happening in Namibia, in the region. What is your strategic, intervention that you are making at a client level so that your clients are very much aware of what's happening?
Thank you very much. I'll start with the journey that we developed, I think, 24 months ago. Obviously, we needed to include sustainability in the core business strategy for the bank. And that journey was with a view of ensuring that we're very clear which direction we want to take. Now, for those that are aware, Zambia has got pretty much great natural capital, which obviously is being utilized at unsustainable levels. So obviously a case for climate change there. We've got quite some good water bodies in the country. We've got some good existing forest plantations already. Now with that, it means that the country is green investment ready. So one of the things that we did as part of our sustainability strategy development was to form a Green Outcomes Fund. We partnered with WWF, Kukula Capital, to just form this fund with the intention of raising about $60 million in less than 12 months now. And Zanaco is the anchor investor in that fund. We decided to be the anchor investor because we needed to show international investors that we believe in what we want to do, but also the fact that there are huge opportunities that are there in the country, where now we can start opening up capital for businesses that need to access that capital. Now, just speaking about the aspect of transition and the impact on communities, we do realize that first and foremost, most of the African countries, Zambia inclusive, the choice between cutting down a tree and leaving it for future generation is the choice that one has to make between having a meal and not having a meal. Now, with that risk that we see, the question that we ask is, how do we now engage communities to make those transitions? So we do work with our clients that are driving initiatives that are moving certain customers from, say, cutting down trees into other skill sets. For instance, beekeeping is one of those that we're supporting. So these customers will get loans from International Impact Fund, and we guarantee those loans so that we give them working capital. It's really, really social enterprise business that they are running, so that they have those skill sets and input finance to drive the customers from cutting down trees into beekeeping. The other alternative is those clients or communities where people were poaching animals for food, for a livelihood. And then we had to introduce again or fund companies that would buy rice off them. So they were given other alternative skill sets and livelihoods to ensure that they start planting rice, and the companies that we're funding are providing a market for it. So that is one aspect that we get close to that. Apart from that, obviously, it's the lobbying, communications, making people aware of the dangers of climate change, but also how we handle transition from current economies to the low carbon economies that we want to get to. So those are some of the interventions that we've had to do as we transition.
Great. And I'll take it back to Botswana again. You've heard about relationships. You've heard about the guarantees that are put. You've heard about the funds that are being created. I'd like to take it a step further around the criteria, because the criteria will define the kind of capital that each client will, and when I say the kind of capital, it's whether it's cheap or not. So if you can talk a little bit about that. Yes, we've heard about how you are leading your clients towards new innovative ways of doing things to ensure food security. But can you tell us a little bit about how do you bring all of these things? Because I'm sure you're also doing the same around relationship building, the guarantees and all of that. But how does that lend up with your clients when it comes to how you price your money, how you outline the risks, how you get into that investment or decision making that you'll have to make as a bank?
Perhaps let me start by commending my colleague Chali from Zambia around the green fund that they established. You don't see green bonds being issued in Southern Africa quite often. I think it's really commendable that they're leading that journey. From a Botswana perspective, in fact, from an NDB perspective, in terms of now pricing, we have run, I think, the past 2 years, a fund that we set up to promote horticulture, for instance. And in that fund, we had a certain criteria around youth. If you're youth, the pricing was cheaper to incentivize youth. If you're a woman, there was pricing for that. And this is done, again, when we talk about development, we talk about sustainable development. From the youth perspective, most of the unemployed in Botswana are youth. So you need to incentivize them to get into agriculture. It's the last place I think they think about when they think about employment. But if you're going to create smart farms, it is the youth that you must begin to target, because they can see a smart farm, they can see themselves in that space. So incentives for them is really important. But the cost of entry, if you know the cost of a greenhouse, is huge. So blended financing becomes key for this type of investments, so that one, the youth who will generally have no security and need to access financing, you can have some sort of a financing model that allows them to enter into the agri space. So we work quite closely with government, but that's not enough. We need access to funds that can then allow us to bring in more youth and women into the agri space. And in fact, one key thing that we're looking at is also just around renewables. Farms are not in cities, fortunately, and farms where they are off the grid. We don't want to bring those farms onto the grid. If we can have renewables at the farms, powering them up where they are, and not worrying about extending our grid to those farms, then that's a plus for us. So that's the drive that we're now pushing, to say, let's power the farms where they are using renewables. Let's not extend the grid. Everyone else that needs to have projects, let's fund them in isolation using renewables. And for us, in terms of transitioning, in terms of net zero, those are investments that we need to be making now. So access to funding is really, really key for.
I'd like to touch on a point you mentioned earlier on around bonds, green bonds. There's this whole move around green bonds, sustainability bonds, social bonds. They're being named. And there's frameworks which different institutions are pulling together. And these frameworks are put in place so that they can basically guide their own internal processes. But there are standard things that your investors will still require from you as a bank. The use of proceeds. How do you manage those proceeds? How do you, the monitoring, the evaluation, the reporting, the disclosures, the systems that you have to put in place. Can I ask you to touch a little bit on that? Is that something that you've already started on within your institution?
From an institution perspective, we are cleaning up everything that we do, aligning it to ensure that when we issue such bonds, as NDB, we'll be ready to demonstrate, to say this is where our money goes. Proceeds of those bonds doesn't go into coal. It goes back into renewables. It's a process that we've begun. But if you were to ask me, is that process going to take you 2 years for you to be ready? If it's going to take us 2 years, we need to get started.
Yep.
it might not be perfect in terms of the monitoring and everything that comes with it. But the pragmatic thing is, let's do it today, not in 2 years' time.
Yep.
So get started and then fix it as you go along. There's a lot of pressure to get a perfect organization, a perfect model around these things.
We are banks after all.
Time is not on our side. 2030 is around the corner, and if we don't make the change today, so for anyone who starts anything, climate doesn't wait for inclusion. It's what you're doing today that is affecting climate. So the pragmatic thing is, let's get into them. We'll fix them as we go along.
Yep. Claire?
I will happily invite my colleague to come in and we'll help you with your framework. Yeah. So
Can you talk a little bit about your framework, the framework that you've put in place to actually ensure that these 4 things that investors are normally looking for, and you'll help me, it's the use of proceeds, it's the management of proceeds, it's the evaluation, reporting and system. I'm forgetting the 4th one. What is the 4th one?
So it's use of proceeds, the evaluation, the management of the proceeds, and then the reporting.
The reporting.
Yeah.
What is it that you've put in place, and what has been your journey around this?
Okay, so I have got a whole presentation on this later, but just in short, it was, again, collaborating and working in partnerships with relationships you already have. So we already had a very, very good relationship with the IFC, and they assisted us. When we decided we wanted to issue a green bond, from the time we started to the time we issued was 6 months. And that was because we were guided by the IFC. It wasn't big, we didn't get it perfect, but we managed to raise 66 million Namibian dollars with 2 investors. Old Mutual was one of them because they were already way ahead of the curve, as we can see, as we heard. So that was the important thing. And we allocated the funding to 7 projects, but it was great. It allowed us to, we won 2 awards for that green bond. And then after that, we issued a sustainability bond, which then expanded the projects that we could give the proceeds of the funds to include societal and women in business and small medium enterprises, affordable housing. That wasn't under the definition of the projects we could apply our green bond to. So that assisted us. Then we raised a lot more. We raised 407 million. And I think we wanted to help our bank in Botswana, Bank Gaborone, but this was in 2018, and they were still, oh no, but energy or electricity from coal is still so much cheaper. Guys aren't really doing the renewable thing. And then the next minute they were like, okay, we also need to get into this. Yeah. So yeah, it's just some people are way ahead of the curve. The rest of us are still learning. But ask and
yeah.
Partner.
Your side, you already have a fund. Bond, are you also going that route? Is it something that you're setting up?
So this is an investment fund, but maybe I can pick up on the documentation side and reporting side of things, which is not yet there, but we're currently developing. So one of the things that we had was, obviously we had an A&S policy already in the bank. And then I recall at some point we were having conversations with IFC and they were not happy with us. And as we started re-establishing and moving into the sustainability route, we reached out to them. They've supported us. PwC have supported us. So we now have an enhanced E&S policy in place. The other thing that draws to partnerships, or the benefit from partnerships, is that we've also started training our C-suite teams and the rest of the employees in integrated reporting. So we already have trainings going on as we speak, so that we just start putting together all the different components that are required for reporting purposes. We also did another training on leading sustainable business models, for banks, and that has also helped in awareness and also realizing what we really need to do in order, or what our customers are expected to do in order for us to finance them. Now with that, we'll be integrating the reporting into our credit underwriting standards, so that we're very clear, if we have to work with a certain customers, these are the expectations. And we also have to decide whether we go for this project or the other project. The other thing that the partnership has brought really is the realization that, again, you can't force transition. It has to be done gradually. And the engagements with some of the DFIs brought that to light, because obviously they were in a hurry for us to do certain things, but we recognize the impact that a huge or sharp transition will create, or the negative impact that it will create in the communities. So we're at a stage where we are now putting it together. My view is we really, really need to take each case as unique and understand the dynamics in communities, understand the requirements of the individual businesses. But at some point, we need to start releasing the capital so that these projects that are usually longer tenure structured can kickstart.
Yep.
Because now we run a risk of debating how the definition should be or how clean your current existing book should be. And yet we are in urgent need to transition, and our customers have got all these initiatives that they need to implement for them to continue doing business. So it's really ensuring that we speed up our actions, both from the commitment side, but also releasing capital so that we are not getting caught up in the red tape of defining this definition that is compared to another country, probably in the Northern Hemisphere.
For me, what I still find very interesting that as banking institutions, you do a lot of due diligence. Should be easy for you to do this reporting. Should be easy for you to store this information already. You have systems in place. How is this different now? This new emerging path, what is different from how you've always done business? If you can give
There's quite a lot to it. Other than from a banking perspective, usually you look at the bottom line. And will I get my return on this? But if there's a social impact, it's a whole different ballgame. There's a lot more due diligence that you must sit with the communities.
But what is more due diligence? Because you've always looked at deals and say, will this, give me the returns that I want? And you'll collect as much information as you want.
You could be moving people.
And you are operating in the Southern Africa, you're operating in the continent which is driven in its investments, by development. What is it that you...
It's the impact of the project on the environment and the community that you must make sure you fully understand. By simply diverting water into a different path, a whole ecological system could collapse on the other side. So that's the due diligence that comes then with these projects, and you need to be mindful of things like that. So the due diligence is enhanced. It's not what you have in your financial scorecard. And it's a space that, as a bank, naturally you may not have the skill set, and you need to rely on either an environmentalist to do that and make sure that when that process is complete, it fits into your own process around the financial evaluation. So it is...
Claire, the relationship between your bankers and environmentalists within your bank, can you share a little bit around that within your institution? What is that relationship?
So for Capricorn, we specifically say our purpose statement is improving lives through leadership in financial services by being connectors of positive change. So we've already made that choice, that we're here to facilitate that change, and we're here for the sustainable future, and we want to ensure that the communities within which we operate are sustainable. So I think everybody's already made that choice, and it's in our DNA. But yes, you are right. There are people who want to run, and there are the rest of us who are saying, but what's the hurry? And again, it comes down to the reporting and the governance, and we don't want to have to comply with anything until our regulator says we absolutely have to. So because there's a cost to that compliance. So yes, we do have the information, but the information we have is pretty much financial information. We don't have that impact. We don't ask our clients necessarily, so how many additional people did you employ? What was your CO2 emissions at the end of this project? Was it more, was it less? And those are the types of questions that we need to start asking, and the clients need to start measuring. So even within our own integrated report, every year we try to report on something more, something additional. So, are we going to now start reporting on our loan book in a more detailed way, which we haven't been doing in the past? But it's one step at a time.
There's a shift from reporting just your outcomes to now reporting your impact.
Exactly.
How much is that costing you? I'm asking the chief commercial officer here. How much is that costing you? Is it something, do you have a budget for it? Who budgets for it within the bank? Whose responsibility is it within the bank? Who reports on all of this within the bank?
Interesting question. So first and foremost, the reporting has to cover the different aspects of the decisions that you've made, right? It could be ESG, it could be CSR, gender under HR. So you collapse that and you throw it into the finance space to do the reporting. But it's really, really not just reporting, it's reporting what is actually being done. Because
impact, yes.
You don't want to lie. It creates a reputation risk. Now, I'd like to pick up on one of the points. So being an intermediary, we do what our customers, or we set a tone for our customers to do certain things. Now, our customers need to transition, need to start reporting things in a certain way. Yeah. And then we align on that. That's one side of the reporting. The other side is really reporting or being ready with reports so that you can bring in capital. Now, that side of things is also where we are having issues, because the expectations of the DFIs that can bring capital to unlock is totally different from what we are finding on the ground. Now, the capital is required because most of the projects in sustainable models are longer tenor projects. Yeah. And because of the mismatch that we have as commercial banks between liabilities and assets, we can't afford to finance those using our balance sheets. So we really, really need to open that door for capital. So what we need now to do is ensuring that the disconnect between the expectations of the DFIs and what is actually happening on the ground is reduced. Yep. Yes, it's a journey, but there are certain things that we can do differently, contextualizing with the operations that we have in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's one of the things that we need really, really to bring forward and ensure that there's alignment.
I see Blaze. Can I still ask last question? Board, your exco, and everyone around the bank, who is driving this agenda? Is it top down? Is it bottom up? Where are we?
For us, it's top down. From a government policy perspective, that is coming through. And like I mentioned earlier, NDB then becomes the right vehicle to implement these things. So there is a commitment from government, 15% by 2030 reduction in carbon footprint for the country. And we need to be able to then demonstrate that through the projects that we are funding. So for us, it's top down.
It's top down. So your bankers, they just have to do this.
We need to do this.
Okay. On your side, Claire?
Yes.
Bottom up, top down?
It's also top down. I think, but from our side, we've got the group initiative, and then each entity then makes it real in their own entity. So we've got the overall arching strategy and where we would like to be, and then each entity must report back in terms of, so how are we going to achieve that within Namibia or within Botswana or within banking, or within insurance. So I think you are then left to say, okay, well, let's work because it's unique for each of us.
And both of you've got key performance indicators around this? Yeah. And to you, sir?
I would like to call it a hybrid. First, there was a leadership tone that was set. Let's do sustainability and incorporate it into the business strategy. But then we needed a buy-in from our members of staff. It's a mindset change. Yep. It's a culture change. And these are the people that are interacting with the customers. These are the people who understand customer value propositions. So we needed to start involving them at the earliest possible stage. So right now, we are learning together. And that's why we've spread the trainings across the bank so that everyone starts changing. Everyone that goes out to meet a customer, they're having these conversations about natural capital, the impact of what you're doing on society, and the future sustainability of your business. So we've got this hybrid model where we are attacking from both below or junior staff and also board level and management board level.
Are these bonus linked dividends? No?
So I do have a KPI for sustainability. So I do believe that there could be incentives there, but it's one thing that we've recognized even at board level. there's a KPI that is being generated so that the board knows that there's actually something out of this if I delivered. So throughout the organization, yes, there'll be incentives around that.
I'm asking this for all of you. I wish my chief commercial officer was here. But on that note, thank you so much, Blaise. I don't know, we can continue until with this conversation, but I see you sitting there. Okay. Yeah. Are there any questions?
Ooh.
I know Blaise didn't allow me for that, but it's an opportunity. They're here.
Chanda, let me just, because of the recording. Well, you're loud enough for the room, but you for the recording here, right? And time memorial.
You committed yourself.
Thank you, Blaise. Thank you. So this is for Namibia and Botswana. So you talked about having KPIs on sustainability. How have you managed that? Is it just for the C-suite? Is it cut across? How are you dealing the KPI issue?
Okay, from our side, specifically Bank Windhoek, I think our first KPI was just in terms of growing our sustainable finance portfolio. So that was our starting point. So it was very much more about sustainable finance. In terms of the other ESG factors and so on, those are still being put in place. So for me, sitting in Treasury, again, it's all down to the numbers. And that's my focus, and that is where my KPIs are in terms of raising the funding and how we then distribute that to the viable projects and defined projects within our framework.
Yeah. For Botswana NDB, it's also around just raising the financing for those type of projects. Still work in progress, but we've managed to incorporate it with our shareholder compact with government. Okay. So on a quarterly basis, government sits down with us and says, how are you doing on this aspect and what is the investment in this area? So we need to go back and look at how much we've spent in renewables and say this is how much has been invested in, and that's the KPI that's sitting there for.
Is your shareholder happy with your KPI at the moment?
There's a lot more we could do.
So no bonuses in Botswana.
Oh, thank you. Just to Namibia and everyone. We know that in climate finance or green financing is also this sustainability, green and social bond is very important for now as an emerging market. So can we know for Namibia, how long will you take from the end to end to prepare the framework or the ticket size, and if it's issued on just in local or international? So if it come up a bit for, and the last is how if, I'm from Tanzania, CRDB, so how if we want a chance to learn too from you. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. I think it was because we asked the IFC and they guided us. So as I said, from the time the idea hit us to the time we issued our bond was 6 months. And then with the sustainability bond, it was quicker because it was sort of just making a few changes within the framework, the green bond framework, adding the additional projects that qualified and so on. So in total, we've raised over 450 million from both bonds. But yeah, it's just a matter of we gladly will assist you, whether it's a phone call and guide you through it. And I think that the member of my team who took this by the horns it was somebody who was passionate about it, and he didn't even know he was passionate about it until he started this journey. And he has since moved to be the group head of sustainability, just from this 4-year journey since 2018 when we issued our green bond. So he learned so much from it. He has now moved to another level and a wider aspect. So I think there is a lot to be done. But yeah, we just made sure that we asked the right questions. We spoke to our stock exchange and spoke to anybody who was willing to assist, whether it was a Deloitte or a PwC or whoever, and we gained learnings from there. And I think that was what was important.
Can I ask something? 6 months just for the bond framework. What about the internal systems and procedures within the bank?
No, I think it was a matter of the worst part was the reporting, because there's lots of reporting you have to do, but you're doing that to issue the bond and then disperse the funds. Yeah. That is where we then had an additional period, another year, in which to be able to learn there. because we'd issued and we said within a year we will have dispersed the funding and have reported on it. So then we would get our assurance report and our impact report. So it gave us an additional year. So it was adding an indicator onto our system to say, when this is a sustainable loan, you must tick this indicator, and then you could get a report out of it, out of the system. So those were those small things that we were able to do. But because it was a smaller number of loans, it was easy to manage on an Excel spreadsheet initially until you could get your systems enhanced.
Yeah. There's one more. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Ramla from CRDB Bank, Tanzania. My question is to the Namibia panelists. You talked about two bonds, green and sustainability. I would like to know if do we have to have different frameworks, or we can have one framework that fits all when you want to issue sustainability bonds? And the other question is to Zanaco. You talked about having sustainability training. You seem like you are very much ahead on sustainability issues. So I'd like to know if you also offer trainings to other banks from other countries, or only your bank.
I think that is why we are here for these past 2 days. And I think it's very important that we have more of these type of engagements. But yes, that's why we moved from green bond to sustainability bond, because the sustainability bond has got a much wider definition of the projects that you can fund to. So it includes renewables. It includes smart agriculture, but it also includes women in business and affordable housing. So that's why we've moved straight to the sustainability bond. We don't know why everybody's running on the green bond. It's too limited.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about trainings, we've had quite a number from Oxford University, from Deloitte and Touche, from IFC, from Blaze. So we obviously are on a learning journey as well, but we can definitely introduce you to some of the partners, because I think one of the things that we've realized is that partnerships are really, really key in this journey, and they are really available to offer help in as far as skills trainings are concerned.
Yeah. There's a lot also from the stock exchange. You touched on it. I know in South Africa, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange has been leading work around guidelines around the similar issues, and has been assisting us as a corporation when it comes to drafting our sustainability bond framework. But I think we've spent a lot of time on the detail instead of just issuing the bond.
Absolutely,
yeah. So it's something that I think I'll relay back to my colleagues, to our treasurer, to say maybe we shouldn't be spending time on seeing whether we can measure impact and reports on it. Let's just issue it and try and classify the deals, and according to whether is this a sustainability loan? Yes. And let's focus on those few deals. Yeah.
Lwandle, if I could make one observation, is that all the colleagues on the stage are going to be with us for the rest of the day. And I bullied Claire into giving us a presentation this afternoon, the cheat sheet on how to green bonds, how we did it, and to give us a little bit more insight. So we'll hear a little bit more in detail about some of the discussion, but all of the colleagues on the stage are going to be with us. Lwandle does need to leave for the airport, but I did promise Bossa a last question, but I think then we should draw to a close so that we can then make our lunch date. All right.
Thank you.
So Bossa's last question, and then we'll draw to a close. Thanks, Lwandle.
Thank you very much, Blaze. My question is to Claire, also on green bonds. Implicit is an assumption that the green bonds should come out from a pricing point of view a bit better. Theoretically, this appears to be the expectation. Practically on the ground, what has been the experience so far? Thank you.
Okay, I think we were lucky because we were the first bank in the Southern African region to issue a green bond. And as I said, Old Mutual was one of the investors. The other one was our government pension fund, and their mandates had started to include ESG. And so they were keen to get this first green bond that was being issued. So yes, we did issue it at a 25 basis point discount, but our sustainability bond we issued at the same price as we would have issued a vanilla bond. So I think when we jumped in early, there was a pricing benefit, but I think it also depends on the size. How much do you want to raise? So you probably could raise a smaller amount at a bit of a discount, but if you want to raise a large amount, then it comes to the point where you probably land up issuing it at the same as you would a vanilla bond. But again, it depends who your investors are and how keen they are to participate.
Should we? Thank you very much. I mean, this has been very interesting, a learning experience for me. Thanks, Blaze, and thank you to you for being such a wonderful audience. I hope you also were able to learn as much as I did. And thank you to our panelists for making time for this. I know you're very busy individuals, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.